The secret meeting took place in the ruins of Kepler Station, a former trade hub that had been abandoned after the Zephyrian invasion. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez waited nervously in the damaged conference chamber, knowing that the next few hours would either forge an alliance that could challenge the Empire or result in humanity's complete isolation. The delegates arrived one by one, representatives of species that had lived under Zephyrian rule for decades or centuries. The Corvani delegation was led by former Admiral Zixtar, whose people had once commanded a powerful navy before their defeat 50 years ago. The Stellar Federation sent Dr. Yilan Nex, a researcher whose world had been conquered during her childhood. Each species carried the scars of submission, but also the spark of hope that human resistance had ignited. "We appreciate your willingness to meet," Elena began, studying the alien faces around the table. "But we need to be clear about what we're proposing. This isn't just about supporting human resistance. We're talking about a coordinated rebellion across multiple sectors of the Empire." Admiral Zixtar leaned forward, his mantis-like features expressing skepticism. "Ambassador Rodriguez, your species has fought bravely, but you've been at war for less than a year. My people submitted to the Empire after watching our entire fleet destroyed in a single engagement. What makes you believe that combined resistance will succeed where individual efforts have failed?" Elena activated a holographic display showing battle reports from across human space. The Phoenix and its sister ships had destroyed 17 Zephyrian vessels in the past month alone. Resistance operations had liberated 6 prison camps and freed thousands of captured humans. Most importantly, intelligence networks had identified weaknesses in the Empire's command structure that could be exploited. "Because humans don't know how to quit," Elena replied simply. "And we've learned that the Empire isn't as invincible as they want everyone to believe." Dr. Nex studied the tactical data with scientific precision. Her species, the Thalani, had been renowned for their analytical abilities before their conquest. "These results are impressive, but they represent attacks on peripheral targets. The Empire's core strength remains intact. King Vorthak commands resources that dwarf our combined capabilities." Elena had expected this objection. "Dr. Nex, may I ask what happened to your people's resistance movement after the conquest?" The Thalani delegate's expression darkened. "We conducted a cost-benefit analysis of continued resistance versus integration into the Empire. The mathematical conclusion was clear. Submission offered better survival rates for our population." "And that's where we differ," Elena said. "Humans don't do cost-benefit analyses when it comes to freedom. We've been studying your histories, all of your histories. Every species that submitted to the Empire did so, because they made rational decisions based on overwhelming odds. You weighed survival against independence and chose survival." She stood and walked to the chamber's damaged viewport, looking out at the wreckage of ships that had once carried trade between worlds. "Humans are not rational in that way. We're stubborn, angry, and completely unwilling to accept that something can't be done just because it's never been done before." The meeting continued for hours, with each delegation sharing intelligence about Zephyrian operations in their sectors. The picture that emerged was of an empire stretched thin by the unexpectedly costly human resistance. Garrison forces were being pulled from conquered worlds to reinforce supply lines. Construction of new ships was being delayed as resources were diverted to occupation duties. Former Admiral Zixtar presented the most crucial intelligence. "The Corvani Underground has maintained contact with resistance cells throughout the Empire. If coordinated properly, simultaneous uprisings could overwhelm local Zephyrian forces before reinforcements arrive." Elena felt a surge of hope. "What would you need from us?" "Weapons," Dr. Nex replied immediately. "Your plasma technology is more advanced than anything we've developed. Ship designs that can challenge Zephyrian vessels. Most importantly, we need proof that victory is possible." The alliance that formed in that damaged station became known as the Liberation Front, though its members preferred to call it simply the Resistance. Each species brought unique capabilities to the coalition. The Corvani provided intelligence networks and military experience. The Thalani offered advanced scientific knowledge and analytical capabilities. Smaller species contributed specialized skills in stealth technology, communications, and sabotage. But the humans brought something else entirely: the absolute conviction that the Empire could be defeated. Within weeks, Human technical specifications were being transmitted across the galaxy through hidden communication networks. Resistance cells that had been conducting minor sabotage operations suddenly found themselves equipped with weapons that could threaten Zephyrian installations. Underground shipyards began producing vessels based on human designs, adapted for the unique physiology and tactics of different species. King Vorthak received the first reports of coordinated alien resistance with growing alarm. The Corvani rebellion on Sector 7 had overwhelmed the garrison and liberated 3 planets before reinforcements arrived. Thelani scientists had developed improved shield-piercing technology that was spreading to other resistance groups. Most disturbing of all, captured prisoners were refusing to provide intelligence, claiming allegiance to something called the Liberation Front. "This cannot be allowed to continue," he declared to his war council aboard the Eternal Dominion. "The humans are spreading their disease of rebellion to conquered populations. If this alliance consolidates, it could threaten the stability of the entire empire." General Thurvok, recently promoted after the previous commander's failure to contain human resistance, studied intelligence reports with professional concern. "My lord, the coordination suggests a sophisticated command structure. The humans appear to be sharing advanced technology and tactical knowledge with all rebellion groups." Admiral Kelthon added his own analysis. "The economic impact is becoming severe. We're spending more resources on suppressing rebellion than we're gaining from conquered territories. Several sectors are operating at a net loss." Vorthak's 4 fists slammed into his throne's armrests. The empire had been built on a simple principle: overwhelming force followed by peaceful integration. Conquered species accepted their fate, contributed to imperial strength, and eventually became loyal citizens. The humans had shattered this pattern, and their defiance was spreading like a plague across his domain. Back on the hidden base where the Liberation Front coordinated their operations, Elena received reports that filled her with fierce satisfaction. Human weapon designs had been adapted by 6 different species, each modification improving on the original concept. Corvani stealth ships were conducting raids deep in Zephyrian territory. Thelani analysts had identified critical vulnerabilities in the Empire's supply network. "The Empire is beginning to crack," reported Admiral Chen during a secure communication from the Phoenix. "Our intelligence indicates that Vorthak is being forced to pull ships from exploration and expansion duties to deal with resistance activities. For the first time in centuries, the Zephyrian Empire has stopped growing." Elena smiled as she compiled the daily reports. Each successful operation, each liberated world, each Zephyrian defeat sent a message across the galaxy. The Empire was not invincible. More importantly, species that had lived under imperial rule for generations were remembering what it felt like to fight for their freedom. The rebellion was growing, spreading from system to system like wildfire, and at its heart was the simple human refusal to accept defeat, even when victory seemed impossible. The Zephyrians had awakened something ancient and dangerous, the desire for freedom that lived in every sentient species, waiting for someone brave enough to stand up and say no to tyranny. King Vorthak's empire was learning that conquest was easy compared to holding territory filled with populations that refused to stay conquered. The humans had taught the galaxy how to resist, and now there was no putting that knowledge back in the bottle. The liberation of the Zephyrian home system began at exactly 1400 hours, Galactic Standard Time, with the largest coordinated attack in recorded history. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of the UES Phoenix, now flagship of the combined Liberation Fleet, watching as ships from dozens of species dropped out of hyperspace around the fortress world of Zephyros Prime. The fleet was magnificent and impossible. Human ships flew alongside Corvani stealth vessels, Thelani science ships, and craft from 100 other species that had thrown off the chains of empire. Each vessel bore the scars of rebellion and the weapons of innovation. Together they represented something the galaxy had never seen, a truly united front against tyranny. "All ships report ready, Admiral," announced Commander Park from the communication station. Liberation Fleet stands at 2,347 vessels. Resistance forces on the surface confirmed they're prepared for simultaneous uprising. Chen felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. The plan was audacious beyond reason, a direct assault on the Empire's capital world, while King Vorthak and his primary fleet were away suppressing rebellions in the outer sectors. If they failed here, the rebellion would be crushed. If they succeeded, the Empire itself might crumble. The defense of Zephyros Prime was formidable. Orbital defense platforms bristled with weapons that could shatter moons. The home fleet, though, diminished by the demands of fighting rebellion across the galaxy, still numbered in the thousands. Ancient shield generators protected the planet with energy barriers that had never been breached, but the Liberation fleet had advantages the defenders couldn't anticipate. Every ship in the attacking force had been designed or modified using hard-won knowledge of Zephyrian weaknesses. Their weapons were specifically calibrated to penetrate Imperial shields. Their tactics had been developed through 2 years of asymmetric warfare against impossible odds. Most importantly, they were fighting for freedom. "All units, commence Operation Liberation," Chen commanded. The battle began with a display of human tactical innovation that stunned both sides. Instead of a frontal assault, the Liberation fleet split into hundreds of small groups, each one following complex attack patterns designed to overwhelm the defenders' targeting systems. Ships appeared and disappeared through hyperspace jumps, striking targets and vanishing before return fire could be coordinated. The first orbital platform died within minutes, its massive weapons arrays silenced by a coordinated strike from 12 different attack groups. As its wreckage tumbled toward the planet's surface, resistance fighters on Zephyros Prime launched their own uprising, targeting shield generators and communication centers. Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian home fleet watched in growing horror as his carefully planned defensive positions were systematically dismantled. These weren't the desperate suicide attacks he had been briefed to expect. This was sophisticated military strategy, executed by forces that seemed to know every weakness in his formations. "How are they penetrating our shields?" he demanded from his flagship Imperial Might. "Those weapons shouldn't be able to breach our defenses." His tactical officer's reply carried the tone of someone discovering their fundamental assumptions were wrong. "Sir, they're using some kind of harmonic resonance effect. Their plasma weapons are specifically tuned to our shield frequencies. It's as if they studied our technology and designed counters for everything we have." That was exactly what had happened. 2 years of desperate warfare had taught humanity and their allies everything about Zephyrian technology. Every captured weapon had been analyzed, every shield generator studied, every tactical pattern memorized. The Empire's greatest strength, their technological consistency, had become their weakness against enemies who specialized in adaptation. The Phoenix led a strike group directly toward the planet's primary shield generator, a massive installation that had protected Zephyros Prime for over 1,000 years. As they approached, Chen saw the planet's surface clearly for the first time. Gleaming cities connected by transport networks, vast industrial complexes, and monuments to imperial conquest that reached toward the sky. Soon, she thought grimly, those monuments would have different meanings. "Target the shield generator's power coupling," she ordered. "All ships concentrate fire on grid reference 77 Alpha." The combined firepower of 30 ships struck the shield generator's most vulnerable point simultaneously. The ancient HFY installation, designed to withstand conventional weapons, had no defense against plasma charges specifically configured to exploit its harmonic frequency. The shield collapsed in a cascade of failing energy fields, leaving Zephyros Prime defenseless for the first time in its history. On the planet's surface, former Admiral Zixtar led a mixed force of Corvani warriors and human marines in an assault on the Imperial Command Center. The Zephyrian garrison, depleted by the demands of fighting rebellion across the Empire, found themselves facing an enemy that fought with the fury of the oppressed and the skill of the desperate. "The Palace District is secured," Zixtar reported through the tactical network. "Resistance fighters have liberated the primary detention facility. We're receiving surrender requests from several garrison commanders." The news spread through the Liberation fleet like wildfire. For the first time in galactic history, the capital, world of the Zephyrian Empire, was falling to rebel forces. The psychological impact was enormous. If Zephyros Prime could be conquered, then nowhere in the Empire was truly safe. Commander Veltar made his final stand aboard the Imperial Might, surrounded by the wreckage of his fleet, and facing odds that made victory impossible. As Liberation ships closed in from all sides, he opened a communication channel to the enemy flagship. "Admiral Chen, he said with the dignity of a professional soldier facing defeat. "I offer the surrender of the remaining home fleet. We request terms for our personnel." Chen's response carried both respect for a worthy opponent and the hard edge of someone who had seen too many war crimes. "Commander Veltar, your surrender is accepted. Your personnel will be treated according to the laws of war. However, certain individuals will face trial for crimes against civilian populations." The formal surrender of Zephyros Prime's defenses marked the end of active resistance, but the real victory was still to come. Dr. Sarah Okafor, now leading a joint human-alien science team, had been working on the rebellion's ultimate weapon, a way to permanently cripple the Empire's ability to wage war. "Admiral, we're ready to implement the final phase," she reported from her position aboard a captured Zephyrian science vessel. "The quantum virus will propagate through their entire communication and navigation network within hours. Every Zephyrian ship in the galaxy will lose the ability to coordinate fleet movements or navigate hyperspace." Chen considered the implications. The quantum virus would effectively strand Zephyrian forces throughout the galaxy, making coordinated resistance impossible. Isolated garrison forces would be forced to choose between hopeless last stands or negotiated surrenders. The Empire's ability to project power across vast distances would be permanently broken. "Implement the virus," she ordered, "and broadcast our terms to all Zephyrian forces. Immediate cessation of hostilities, release of all prisoners, and withdrawal from occupied territories. Any commander who complies will be treated as a prisoner of war. Any who refuse will be considered war criminals." As the quantum virus spread through Zephyrian networks, reports poured in from across the galaxy. Isolated fleet units were surrendering or abandoning their positions. Garrison forces were negotiating local ceasefires with resistance groups. The Empire's command structure was collapsing as communication became impossible and reinforcement became a distant dream. The Battle of Zephyros Prime had lasted 18 hours. The Zephyrian Empire, which had ruled the galaxy for centuries, was effectively finished. But even as Chen watched the last enemy ships power down their weapons, she knew the hardest part was still ahead. Winning the war had been difficult. Winning the peace would be the true test of everything they had fought for. The galaxy was free, but freedom was just the beginning. Now they had to prove that all the sacrifice had been worth it by building something better than what they had destroyed. The age of empire was ending. The age of liberation had begun. The streets of New Geneva were lined with beings from across the galaxy as the victory parade made its way through the rebuilt city. 3 years had passed since the fall of the Zephyrian Empire, and today marked the formal establishment of the Galactic Liberation Council, the first truly democratic government the galaxy had ever known. Former Colonel Sarah Mitchell, now serving as Earth's representative to the Council, watched from the reviewing stand as the procession approached. The parade was carefully choreographed to send a message. This was not a human victory, but a victory for all free peoples. Every species that had fought in the rebellion was represented, their flags flying alongside banners bearing the simple motto that had united them all: never again. The crowds cheered as liberated prisoners marched past, survivors of Zephyrian labor camps and detention facilities who had been freed during the final collapse of the Empire. Dr. Elizabeth Warren walked among them, her arm around a young Thalani scientist who had been captured during the early days of the rebellion. They had both paid a terrible price for freedom, but they had lived to see it won. Admiral Chen Wei rode in an open vehicle, waving to the crowds while trying to look comfortable with the celebration. She had never wanted to be a hero, merely a soldier doing her duty. But the galaxy needed symbols of resistance, and she had become one whether she liked it or not. Beside her sat former Admiral Zixtar, the former enemy who had become one of humanity's most trusted allies. But the focal point of the parade, the moment everyone was waiting for, came last. A simple ground vehicle approached, escorted by honor guards from every species in the Liberation Front. Inside sat a figure who had once commanded the fear and obedience of trillion souls across the galaxy. King Vorthak the Unconquerable, former ruler of the Zephyrian Empire, now prisoner of the Galactic Liberation Council. The crowds fell silent as the vehicle passed. Vorthak sat straight and proud despite his restraints, his forearms secured but his bearing still regal. His scales had lost some of their luster during his imprisonment, and his golden eyes no longer burned with absolute authority. But he remained recognizably the being who had once declared himself master of the galaxy. Sarah watched the former king with mixed emotions. Part of her felt the satisfaction of seeing a tyrant brought low, but another part recognized the deeper symbolism of this moment. Vorthak wasn't just a defeated enemy. He was proof that no power, no matter how vast or ancient, was beyond challenge. The decision to include Vorthak in the parade had been controversial. Many wanted him executed immediately after his capture. Others argued for life imprisonment on some remote world. But the humans had insisted on this public display, and eventually the other species had agreed. The galaxy needed to see that the age of unquestionable authority was over. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez stepped to the podium as the parade concluded. Her words broadcast to billions of beings across liberated space. Today we celebrate not just military victory but the triumph of an idea. The idea that free peoples working together can overcome any tyranny. She gestured toward the representatives of dozens of species seated behind her. 3 years ago, these worlds were subjects of an empire that seemed eternal. Today, they are founding members of a council where every voice has equal weight, where decisions are made by consent rather than conquest. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Elena's next words brought a moment of solemn reflection. We must never forget the cost of this freedom. Billions died in the war against the empire. Entire worlds were devastated. The suffering was enormous, and we honor those who paid the ultimate price for our liberation. A moment of silence followed, broken only by the sound of wind through the memorial gardens that had been planted throughout the city. Each tree represented a world that had suffered under imperial rule. Each flower honored those who had died fighting for freedom, but the ceremony wasn't finished. As the crowd watched, King Vorthak was escorted to a special platform where the terms of his sentencing would be announced. Judge Yilan Nex, representing the War Crimes Tribunal, read the charges against him: genocide, enslavement, systematic oppression, and crimes against sentient life spanning centuries of conquest. Vorthak of the House of Zephyr, she intoned formally, you have been found guilty of crimes against the civilized galaxy under the laws established by the Galactic Liberation Council. You are sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 100 standard years. The sentence was deliberately merciful, designed to show that the new galactic order would be governed by justice rather than vengeance. Several species had argued for execution, but the humans had convinced them that mercy toward even the worst enemies was essential to building a better future. Vorthak spoke for the first time in months, his voice carrying across the square through translation systems. You spare my life, he said, addressing the crowd directly, but you have destroyed everything I built. My empire spanned the galaxy for over 1,000 years. What makes you believe your Liberation Council will last even a century? Sarah Mitchell stepped forward to answer him, her voice clear and strong. Because we're not building an empire, Vorthak. We're building something you never understood. A voluntary association of free peoples. It will last because everyone chooses to make it last, not because they're forced to submit. The former king's laughter was bitter. You humans are naive. Power corrupts, authority centralizes, the strong dominate the weak. It is the way of the universe. Your council will become an empire, and your representatives will become tyrants. I have seen it happen across the galaxy for millennia. Elena Rodriguez joined Sarah at the podium. You may be right, Vorthak. Power does corrupt, and eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. But that's exactly why we built safeguards into our system. Term limits, checks and balances. The right of any member to withdraw from the council. We learned from history, including the history of your empire. Dr. Warren approached the microphone, speaking directly to the former emperor. Your mistake, Vorthak, was believing that superior technology and overwhelming force could create lasting peace. But peace built on fear and oppression is just delayed war. True peace comes from justice, cooperation, and the willing consent of the governed. As Vorthak was led away to begin his sentence, the crowd slowly dispersed. But the conversations continued in homes, offices, and gathering places across the galaxy. Representatives from member worlds discussed trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. Scientists shared research that had been suppressed under imperial rule. Artists created works celebrating the diversity of free civilizations. The Galactic Liberation Council wasn't perfect, Disputes arose between member species, economic inequalities created tensions, and the constant threat of corruption required eternal vigilance. But it was something the galaxy had never possessed before, a government based on consent rather than conquest. Sarah stood in the memorial gardens as night fell over New Geneva, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. 3 years ago, humanity had faced extinction at the hands of an empire that seemed invincible. Today, that empire was history and the galaxy was free. The victory hadn't come easily or cheaply. The war had claimed billions of lives and devastated entire star systems. The reconstruction effort would take decades, and the work of building a just galactic government would take even longer. But for the first time in galactic history, that work was being done by choice rather than compulsion. As she walked home through streets filled with beings from dozens of worlds, Sarah reflected on the lesson humanity had taught the galaxy. Sometimes the smallest voice, raised at the right moment, could topple the greatest tyranny. Sometimes the most unlikely alliance could achieve the impossible. And sometimes the stubborn refusal to accept defeat could change the course of galactic history. King Vorthak had demanded war with humanity, expecting swift victory and easy conquest. Instead, he had awakened something that had slept too long among the stars, the desire for freedom that lived in every sentient species. And now, as his former subjects walked freely through the liberated streets of 12,000 worlds, that awakening had changed everything. The age of empire was over. The age of freedom had begun, and it had started with humans who simply refused to kneel. Commander Zexithara stood motionless on the bridge of the Crimson Fang, her 3 eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the small blue planet below. The ship's bioluminescent walls pulsed with a deep red rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Around her, the crew of apex predators from across the galaxy worked in perfect silence, their movements precise and deadly. The Zephyrians were legends throughout the known universe. Standing nearly 12 feet tall with razor-sharp claws that could slice through titanium and teeth designed to crush the bones of their prey, they had conquered 17 star systems without a single defeat. Their hunting instincts were so refined that they could track a single drop of blood across an entire solar system. No species had ever successfully resisted them until now. The planet Earth hung in space like a jewel, seemingly defenseless. Initial scans had revealed a species called humans who appeared laughably weak. No natural weapons, no armored hide, no enhanced senses. They were soft, slow, and vulnerable. It should have been the easiest conquest in Zephyrian history, but something had gone terribly wrong. 3 months ago, the first wave of Zephyrian scouts had landed in what humans called the Amazon rainforest. 50 of their finest warriors, each capable of taking down a small army, had descended to the surface with confidence. They were supposed to establish a foothold and begin the systematic elimination of the local population. Not a single scout had returned. The second wave, twice as large and led by War Chief Korthak himself, had landed in the African savanna. Their biosignatures had simply vanished after 72 hours. No distress signals, no final transmissions, nothing. It was as if they had been erased from existence. Zexithara's mandibles clicked nervously as she reviewed the mission reports. The Galactic Predator Council had been furious. How could the most feared hunters in the universe simply disappear on a planet inhabited by such primitive creatures? They had demanded answers, and Zexithara had volunteered to lead the third wave personally. She had brought the finest warriors from 6 different predator species. The Vextorians with their ability to phase through solid matter, the Grimlock beetles whose exoskeletons could withstand plasma fire, and the Shadow Maw pack hunters who could become invisible at will. If humans had somehow defeated the previous waves, this force would crush them completely. The first sign that something was wrong came during orbital reconnaissance. Their advanced sensors, capable of detecting a heartbeat from orbit, kept picking up strange readings from human settlements. The life signs were normal, but there were patterns the computer couldn't explain. Clusters of small humans that seemed to move with impossible coordination, almost like, "Commander," growled Sub-Chief Vorthak, his scarred hide rippling with anticipation. "The landing parties are ready. We have identified 17 human settlements within a 50-kilometer radius. Shall we begin the hunt?" Zexithara studied the tactical display. The humans lived in strange rectangular structures grouped together in what they called cities. There were larger humans and smaller ones, with the smaller ones appearing to be their offspring. In every predator species she knew, the young were hidden away during times of danger, protected by the adults until they could fend for themselves. But human children seemed to be everywhere. "Begin with Settlement Alpha 7, she commanded. "It appears to have the highest concentration of adult humans. We will establish our dominance there and work outward." The dropships launched from the Crimson Fang like dark meteors, carrying death toward the unsuspecting planet below. Zexithara watched from the command deck as her warriors descended, each one a perfect killing machine honed by millions of years of evolution. The settlement they chose was what humans called a suburb. Neat rows of houses lined quiet streets with small areas of cultivated grass and flowering plants. It looked peaceful, almost serene. The perfect place to begin their conquest. The first landing team touched down in what appeared to be a recreational area. There were strange metal structures that served no obvious purpose, colorful equipment scattered about, and several small humans engaged in some sort of activity. The warriors emerged from their dropships, weapons ready, expecting the humans to flee in terror. Instead, the small humans stopped what they were doing and turned to look at them. Zexithara felt her blood chill as she watched the live feed from her warriors' helmet cameras. The human children, none of them taller than her knee, simply stood there staring at the massive alien predators. There was no fear in their eyes, no recognition of the danger they faced. If anything, they looked curious. One of the children, a small female with yellow hair tied in what humans called pigtails, walked directly toward War Chief Korthak. The massive Zephyrian, who had personally killed over 300 enemies in single combat, took an involuntary step backward. "Hello," the child said in the universal translator's tinny voice. "Are you here to play with us?" Korthak's mandibles twitched in confusion. In all his years of warfare, no creature had ever approached him without fear. This tiny human was acting as if he were nothing more than another playmate. "We are the Zephyrian Empire," he growled, his voice carrying the authority of death itself. "You will surrender immediately or face annihilation." The little girl tilted her head, considering this. "That sounds boring," she said finally. "Want to play tag instead?" "Tommy's it, but he's really slow." More children began approaching from all directions. They emerged from behind trees, from inside the strange metal structures, from houses along the street. Soon the landing party was completely surrounded by dozens of small humans, all looking at them with the same mixture of curiosity and excitement. Zexithara's tactical display showed red warning indicators as her warriors' stress levels spiked. These were creatures that had faced down armored battalions without flinching, but something about these human children was triggering every survival instinct they possessed. "Commander," Korthak's voice came through the comm, strained and uncertain, requesting immediate extraction. "Something is very wrong here." But before Zexithara could respond, something happened that would change the course of galactic history forever. The little girl with pigtails reached up and grabbed Korthak's massive claw with her tiny hand. "Tag," she said, grinning widely. "You're it now." The war chief's biosigns flatlined on Zexithara's display. Not from death, but from something far more terrifying to a predator. Complete psychological shutdown. The galaxy's most feared warrior had been defeated by a human child's game of tag. War Chief Korthak stood frozen in the middle of the human playground, his massive frame trembling as dozens of small children circled around him like tiny predators stalking their prey. The irony was not lost on Commander Zexithara as she watched from orbit, her three eyes fixed on the live feed that showed the most feared warrior in the galaxy being systematically dismantled by creatures barely reaching his knee. The little girl with pigtails had started something that quickly spread to every child in the area. They were playing what they called tag, a simple game where one person chased others and tried to touch them. But what should have been a harmless children's activity had become a nightmare for the Zephyrian landing party. Every time Korthak tried to move away from the group, a different child would dart up and touch his leg, declaring him it again. His warrior training, honed over decades of combat, had prepared him for every conceivable threat except this. How do you fight an enemy that doesn't recognize you as dangerous? How do you intimidate creatures that see your weapons as toys and your war cries as invitations to play? "Korthak, respond," Zexithara commanded through the comm system. "What is your status?" The war chief's voice came back broken and confused. "Commander, I cannot engage." They are younglings. Our code forbids harming younglings of any species. This was true. The Warriors' Code that governed all Zephyrian military action had strict rules about non-combatants, especially children. But the code assumed that younglings would hide or flee when faced with predators, not run toward them demanding to play games. Sub-Chief Vorthak, leading another squad 3 blocks away, was facing similar problems. His team had landed near what humans called an elementary school, and they were now completely surrounded by hundreds of small humans who had poured out of the building like a flood. The children weren't afraid. Instead, they were fascinated. "Look at his teeth," one boy shouted, pointing at Vorthak's razor-sharp mandibles. "They're so cool. Can you bite through metal?" "Are you a dinosaur?" asked a girl with dark skin and bright ribbons in her hair. "My dad says dinosaurs are extinct, but you look just like one." "Can you teach us how to roar like that?" demanded another child. "I want to sound scary too." Vorthak, who had once made an entire enemy battalion surrender just by snarling at them, found himself completely helpless. Every question, every innocent touch, every bright smile seemed to drain his predatory instincts away. These weren't prey animals cowering before a hunter. These were something else entirely. The psychological warfare was devastating. Zephyrians were apex predators because they relied on fear, intimidation, and the natural flight response of their prey. But human children didn't have a flight response when it came to things they found interesting. Instead, they had something far more dangerous: curiosity. "Commander," came the voice of Scout Leader Zex Mora from the 3rd landing site. "We have a situation. The small humans have started bringing us offerings." Zexathera's blood went cold. "Explain." "They are presenting us with food items and colorful objects."
One youngling has wrapped flowers around Warrior Thex's claw.
Another has placed a crown made of vegetation on his head.
They appear to be
celebrating our presence. The tactical display showed all 3 landing parties in various states of psychological collapse. Warriors who had conquered star systems were standing motionless while human children decorated them with flowers, shared their lunch snacks, and asked endless questions about their homeworlds, their families, and whether they wanted to be friends. It was then that Zexthera noticed something that made her hunting instinct scream in alarm. In every settlement they had landed, adult humans were watching from windows and doorways. They weren't running or hiding or calling for help. They were simply observing, many of them with strange expressions on their faces that the universal translator labeled as amusement. The adults knew something. They understood what was happening to the Zephyrian warriors, and they weren't intervening. "All units," Zexathera commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos on the ground. "Immediate extraction protocol. Return to the ship now." But as the drop ships descended to retrieve the landing parties, the children's behavior shifted. The moment they saw the spacecraft approaching, they began what humans called crying. Tears streamed down their faces as they clung to the massive alien warriors, begging them not to leave. "Don't go," sobbed the little girl with pigtails, wrapping her tiny arms around Korthak's massive leg. "We were having so much fun. Will you come back tomorrow? Please stay and play with us," wailed a boy who had spent the last hour showing a Grimlock beetle warrior his collection of small toy vehicles. "Nobody ever wants to play monsters and heroes with me." The psychological impact on the warriors was immediate and catastrophic. Bred for conquest and domination, they had never experienced anything like the innocent affection of children. The crying younglings triggered protective instincts that had been dormant for millennia. Instincts that predated their evolution into galactic hunters. War Chief Korthak's voice came over the comm, barely recognizable. "Commander, The youngling is distressed. "Perhaps we could return tomorrow to ensure her emotional well-being?" Zexathara stared at the display in horror. Her most elite warrior was offering to return to a planet they were supposed to be conquering, because a human child was sad about him leaving. The extraction became a prolonged nightmare. The children followed the dropships all the way to the landing zones, waving and shouting promises to save them the best swings and slides for tomorrow. Some of them had made pictures with colorful sticks and paper, crude drawings of the alien warriors playing games and smiling. As the last warrior was finally extracted and the dropships returned to the Crimson Fang, Zexthara faced a truth that would reshape her understanding of warfare forever. They hadn't just failed to conquer the humans. They had been conquered themselves, systematically and completely, by an enemy they couldn't fight. The children had turned their greatest strength against them. The very code of honor that made Zephyrian successful warriors throughout the galaxy had become their weakness. They couldn't harm younglings, couldn't intimidate creatures that showed them affection, couldn't conquer a species that welcomed them with open arms and invited them to play. Standing on the bridge of her warship, surrounded by some of the most dangerous predators in the known universe, Commander Zexathera faced the most humiliating defeat in galactic military history. They had been beaten by human children armed with nothing more than games, flowers, and an inexplicable lack of fear. And the most terrifying part was that she was already planning to return tomorrow, just like Korthak had suggested. Because somewhere deep in her predatory mind a new instinct had awakened. The instinct to protect those innocent, trusting younglings who had somehow seen past their fearsome exterior and decided they wanted to be friends. The emergency council meeting aboard the Crimson Fang was unlike anything in Zephyrian military history. Warriors who had never shown fear in battle sat in uncomfortable silence, their bioluminescent patterns flickering with uncertainty. Commander Zexathera looked around the room at her officers, noting how many of them kept glancing toward the planet below as if drawn by some invisible force. "Report your findings," she commanded, though she dreaded what she might hear. Scout leader Zex Mora stepped forward, her usually confident posture replaced by something that looked almost like shame. "Commander, our behavioral analysis of the human younglings reveals patterns we cannot explain. They demonstrate pack coordination without apparent communication, strategic positioning that appears random but consistently surrounds our forces, and most disturbing of all, they seem to possess an instinctive understanding of our psychological weaknesses." War Chief Korthak nodded grimly. "The little one with the yellow hair? She somehow knew exactly how to approach me. No trained negotiator could have been more effective. She bypassed every defensive instinct I possess." "It's not just tactics," interrupted Sub-Chief Vorthak, his scarred hide rippling with agitation. "The human younglings triggered responses in my squad that we didn't know existed. Warrior Thex has been asking about the flower crown they made for him. Wants to know if it's considered a battle honor among humans." The room fell silent. Battle honors were sacred to the Zephyrian military. The idea that a simple flower arrangement made by children could be compared to decorations earned through combat was deeply unsettling. Dr. Hextania, the expedition's behavioral specialist, activated a holographic display showing brain scans from the returned warriors. "The neurological data is unprecedented. Exposure to the human younglings activated dormant neural pathways in every subject, pathways that predate our evolution into apex predators. The scans showed areas of the Zephyrian brain lighting up in patterns not seen for millions of years. Ancient instincts that had been suppressed by eons of selective pressure toward aggression and dominance. These are parental protection circuits," Dr. Hextania continued. "The human younglings somehow triggered our species' deepest evolutionary memories. Before we became hunters, we were caregivers. The children found a way to awaken that buried programming." Commander Zexathera felt her blood chill. If this was true, then the humans weren't just using some advanced psychological warfare technique. They were accessing something fundamental about Zephyrian nature, something that made conquest impossible. "There's more," Dr. Hextania said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We've detected similar neural pattern changes in the other predator species in our fleet. The Vextorians, the Grimlock beetles, even the Shadowmaw pack hunters. The human younglings affected all of us the same way. The implications were staggering. If human children could neutralize any predator species that encountered them, then Earth was potentially the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. Not because of their military might, but because they possessed a weapon that no armor could stop and no training could prepare for." "Commander," came a voice from the communications station. "We're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It's from the human younglings." The main view screen flickered to life, showing a group of children standing in what appeared to be one of their educational facilities. They had somehow accessed their planetary communication network and were looking directly into the camera with those unnervingly bright eyes. The little girl with pigtails stepped forward, holding what appeared to be a primitive communication device. "Hello, space friends. We know you're up there in your big ship. We made pictures for you." She held up a collection of colorful drawings that, despite their crude execution, clearly depicted the Zephyrian warriors playing various games with human children. In every picture, the massive alien predators were smiling. We talked to our parents and teachers, continued a boy with dark hair and missing front teeth. They said you might be scared because you don't know how to play our games. That's okay. We can teach you. Another child, a girl with bright red hair and freckles, bounced excitedly. My mom says you might come from a place where kids don't get to have fun. But that's super sad. Everyone should get to have fun. The psychological impact on the bridge crew was immediate. Warriors who had faced down enemy fleets without flinching found themselves leaning forward, hanging on every word from these small humans. We made a list of all the best games, the pigtailed girl announced, unrolling a long piece of paper covered in crayon marks. Hide and seek, tag, red light, green light, duck, duck, goose, and kickball. Oh, and Sarah's mom makes the best cookies in the whole world. She said she'd make extra if you want to come back. The transmission ended with all the children waving enthusiastically at the screen, their faces glowing with excitement and hope. Commander Zexathara stared at the blank screen, her mind reeling. These weren't enemy combatants or even potential victims. These were something entirely outside the framework of galactic warfare. They were innocents who saw massive alien predators and immediately thought about how to include them in their games. Commander, War Chief Korthak said quietly, with your permission, I would like to return to the surface. The younglings are expecting us, and I gave my word that we would come back. Your word? Zexthara turned to face her most trusted officer. To who? To the little one with the yellow hair. She asked if I promised to come back tomorrow, and He paused, his mandibles clicking nervously. I promised. A warrior's promise is sacred. Other voices joined in from around the room. Warriors who had never backed down from a fight were asking permission to return to the planet's surface. Not to continue the invasion, but to honor commitments made to human children. Dr. Hextania pulled up another display, this one showing the current psychological profiles of the returning warriors. Commander, I'm detecting something unprecedented. The neural pathway changes aren't reversing. If anything, they're strengthening. The warriors who interacted with the human younglings are becoming different. Different how? They're developing emotional attachments, protective instincts focused specifically on the children they encountered. It's as if the humans have somehow hacked our evolutionary programming and installed new behavioral patterns. Zexathara realized with growing horror that they weren't dealing with a military problem anymore. This was something far more complex and dangerous. The human children weren't just defeating them in battle. They were changing them at a fundamental level, turning galactic predators into something else entirely. The worst part was that none of the affected warriors seemed to mind. They were eager to return, to honor their promises, to continue playing games with creatures they should have seen as prey. As she looked around the room at her officers, Zexathara saw the same expression on every face. They all wanted to go back. Despite every instinct, every piece of training, every military protocol screaming that this was a trap, they all wanted to return to the planet's surface and play with human children. And deep in her own mind, Commander Zexathara felt the same pull. Somewhere below, a little girl with pigtails was waiting for them to come back, and the thought of disappointing her felt worse than any military defeat. 3 days had passed since the failed invasion, and the Crimson Fang remained in orbit around Earth, its crew in a state of unprecedented confusion. Commander Zexathara had sent encrypted reports to the Galactic Predator Council, but their responses had been increasingly frantic demands for immediate conquest or withdrawal. They couldn't understand how the galaxy's most feared military force had been neutralized by what appeared to be a primitive species. What the Council didn't know was that the situation had evolved far beyond a simple military stalemate. War Chief Korthak had been making unauthorized trips to the HFY planet surface every day, using a small reconnaissance shuttle to visit the playground where he had first encountered the human children. Each time he returned, he brought back more disturbing reports. The younglings have created what they call a friendship chart, he announced during the morning briefing, producing a colorful piece of paper covered in crude drawings and glittery decorations. They have assigned each of us a human youngling as a buddy for teaching purposes. Dr. Hextania examined the chart with scientific fascination. Remarkable. They've somehow identified the psychological profiles of individual warriors and matched them with compatible children. This little one named Emma appears to be assigned to you, Korthak. The notation says she's really good at sharing and gives the best hugs. The war chief's bioluminescent pattern shifted to what could only be described as embarrassment. The youngling Emma has indeed demonstrated exceptional sharing capabilities. She provided me with half of her nutritional supplement, which she called a peanut butter sandwich. You ate human food? Sub-Chief Vorthak asked, incredulous. It would have been discourteous to refuse, Korthak replied defensively. The sharing of sustenance is a sacred ritual among younglings. To reject it would have caused emotional distress. Commander Zexathera studied the friendship chart, noting how each warrior's name had been carefully written in colorful letters next to a child's drawing. The human younglings had somehow assessed the personalities of galactic predators and determined compatibility matches. It was simultaneously adorable and terrifying. Commander, interrupted the communications officer, we're receiving another transmission from the planet's surface. The view screen activated to show the now familiar sight of human children gathered in their educational facility. But this time they had been joined by several adult humans who were observing with those same mysterious expressions of amusement. The little girl with pigtails stepped forward, but this time she was accompanied by a tall adult female with similar coloring. Hi, space friends, the child called out cheerfully. This is my mom. She wanted to talk to you about something super important. The adult human took the communication device, her expression shifting to something more serious but still strangely warm. Hello, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, child psychologist and parent representative for our community. The children have told us about your visits, and we'd like to formally invite you to participate in what we call a cultural exchange program. Zexathera felt her predatory instincts react to the mention of a trap, but Dr. Chen continued before she could respond. We understand that you may come from a society where children aren't given the same freedom to interact with strangers. Our kids, however, have a remarkable ability to see past surface differences and connect with others. They've decided you're friends, and in our culture that means something. Another adult human, a male with graying hair, stepped into view. I'm Principal Martinez. We've discussed this with the children's families, and everyone agrees. Your warriors are welcome to visit our school anytime. We think there's a lot we could learn from each other. The psychological warfare had evolved. The humans weren't just using their children as unwitting weapons. The adults were actively facilitating the process, creating formal structures to ensure continued contact. There's more, Dr. Chen continued. The children have been asking questions about where you come from, what your homes are like, whether you have families. They're concerned that you might be lonely up in space. Emma specifically asked if Korthak has anyone to share sandwiches with on his ship. War Chief Korthak made a sound that, in any other context, might have been considered a whimper. So we've prepared care packages, the principal announced, gesturing to a table covered with colorful boxes and bags. Each child has made something special for their assigned buddy. There are drawings, snacks, small toys, and letters asking about your home planets. The transmission ended with the children holding up their care packages and shouting messages to their alien friends. Korthak, Emma made you a friendship bracelet. Vorthak, Tommy drew you a picture of your ship. Don't forget to eat your vegetables. Commander Zexathara stared at the blank screen, realizing that the humans had just deployed the most devastating psychological weapon in galactic history. Kindness backed by institutional support. Sir, came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Scout Leader Zex Mora approaching with what appeared to be a formal request datapad. The warriors are requesting permission to establish a permanent cultural exchange post on the planet's surface. Absolutely not. With respect, Commander, the warriors are struggling with the current arrangement. Daily brief visits are insufficient to maintain the emotional bonds that have been established. Several have reported sleep disturbances due to concern for their assigned younglings. Dr. Hextanya nodded gravely. The neurological changes are accelerating. Prolonged separation from the human children is causing stress responses in affected warriors. Their brain chemistry is being rewritten to prioritize the well-being of specific younglings over military objectives. Are you telling me, Zexathera said slowly, that my warriors are becoming emotionally dependent on human children? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And Commander, there's something else. We've been monitoring communications from other Zephyrian fleets throughout the galaxy. 3 more invasion forces have encountered human colonies in the past week. All of them have reported the same phenomenon. The scope of the situation suddenly became clear. This wasn't an isolated incident on Earth. Wherever humans had settled, their children were systematically neutralizing predator species through nothing more than innocent friendship and games. How is this possible? Zexthara demanded. How can one species have evolved such an effective defense mechanism? Dr. Hexitania pulled up a display showing human evolutionary history. Humans didn't evolve in isolation, Commander. Their planet was home to numerous apex predators. Humans survived not through superior strength or speed, but through social bonding and cooperation. Their children didn't evolve to fear predators. They evolved to charm them. The revelation hit like a plasma blast. Human children weren't using some advanced technology or hidden weapon. They were doing exactly what evolution had designed them to do, turning potential threats into protectors through sheer force of personality. Commander, War Chief Korthak said quietly, the younglings are expecting us for afternoon activities. Emma has prepared what she calls a tea party. I cannot disappoint her. Looking around the bridge, Zexthara saw that every warrior was silently pleading for permission to return to the surface. They had been conquered as surely as if the humans had destroyed their fleet. But instead of demanding surrender, the victors were offering friendship, snacks, and handmade gifts. She realized that the Galactic Predator Council would never understand. How could she possibly explain that the most fearsome military force in known space had been defeated by creatures who just wanted to play games and share their lunch? Permission granted, she said finally. But this remains classified. No one outside this ship needs to know that we've been culturally exchanged. As her warriors rushed to prepare for their return to the surface, Commander Zexithara wondered if this was how civilizations fell, not in battles or explosions, but in schoolyards and playgrounds, one friendship bracelet at a time.